Here's my Orbea Rallon. You may have seen Matt's video where he introduced his new bike. Essentially at the same time, we both got new bikes, the same spec, and we've both gone in a bit of a different direction with it. Still in enduro mode, but it's actually quite different. The wheel size is the biggest difference straight away. Matt's gone mullet, I stayed 29, so I've got the Orbea wheels, the carbon wheels they come with. I actually really like them, they've not skipped a beat, and you might notice that I've not got an O-chain on, and that's because these Orbea wheels come with DT240 DEG internals. So I've swapped the DEG internals for a DF. So again, I've got that kind of crank movement of a DF or an O-chain, but it's all done in the hub. So we've both got anti-kickback devices on our bikes. Matt's got O-chain, but I've got DF. And then you might notice that the biggest difference is suspension, probably. And I started on the Neo Shock, used the standard 38, and I've just swapped to Zeb's 180, and I've gone Vivid Coil in 62.5, which is the standard shock size, with a 550 spring on it. And so far, I'm absolutely loving it. So the fork, 180 is standard. Matt's podium obviously goes up to 170. So when he put his 170 podium on, he went higher rise bar. I've kept the same stock bar, stock stem. I went with their standard recommended pressures so far. So it's got 148 PSI in and I think 5 clicks of rebound out from fully closed. And I've put low speed and high speed in the middle. It feels amazing, to be honest. I mean, a lot of this is kind of subjective when someone describes suspension to you, but it feels stiffer torsionally than a podium, but it's still almost on a par with how supple that fork is. And I haven't mucked with anything. I haven't done any volume tokens. I've just left it as stock volume tokens, which there might be none in there, I've no idea. But it feels unreal. So like maybe not quite the step up from a 38 to a podium that the podium is, but definitely from the stock 38, which is the 2025 38, a definite improvement in not just small bump, but that mid-stroke small bump that the podium has. So halfway down through when you're going through bumps and corners, it still feels like supple with every hit. I expect the Glide Core 38, the new 2027 as they call it, Fox 38, I expect that's going to be similar. There's a few suspension tuning companies that have released the air spring curves and they look identical. So I would expect the new 38 to feel the same as this, but I'm really impressed with it. I haven't run RockShox for I don't know how long. I've had Fox and Öhlins on all my previous bikes of recent years. The thing that convinced me to go to it was the more linear air spring. RockShox and Fox, to be fair, some of their previous forks, the amount of tokens you ran was so crucial to getting the fork right, and you could run too many and not get full travel, or you could run too little and you'd be banging on the bottom out bumpers. But this fork, on paper, read like it was relying a little bit more on the damper. It had a nice linear air spring, and to be honest, that's exactly what it feels like. It's got a big linear XL kind of bump down the bottom, which helps the pressure in the lowers not add to the ramp of the air spring. It's got a nice integrated mudguard's wicked. So these threads thread through the crown back into themselves. Only 2 of them do. I wish they all 4 did that, but it's the first kind of lesson learned from fork manufacturers that tiny threads into magnesium lowers are a bad idea. So they've kind of combated it with this mudguard that also fits over the top. So you get loads of mud clearance underneath that isn't wasted by your mudguard fitting underneath your arch of your fork, which is really cool. Went coil shock as well, just because I'm a massive coil shock fan. There's less seals moving, it's so much more supple. So supple, in fact, I think I might need a shim tune to just increase low speed compression, because it is crazy. It's like super supple off the top. I've ridden it a few times and maybe I don't, maybe it does support me enough, but it's just such a surprising amount of suppleness. What I'd really like is flight attendant. Will's raved on about it before. I think it's such a cool system that changes your suspension lockout or not, or open based on your power input, which Neo doesn't. Neo is brilliant, by the way. It adjusts your shock depending on the bump that it hits, and it does it super fast, and then the incline of the bike. But I think, for me, I would just love to see the data of my power into the bike changing my shock position. I'm a bit of a nerd like that, so maybe that's just me. Reverb XS, because it's cool, and also because the first time I'm going to race this bike is actually downhill, and I'd quite like to just take the seat post out and just put a normal one in, save some weight there, which is ironic because I've got the weight strapped on it. So Matt talks about the weights and the links that you get. I've got the Enduro link in 29, and the weight bolted to the bike. I haven't actually tried it without it, so I bolted to it straight away. The bike felt planted, the bike felt kind of just stable, and I didn't want it to feel any less stable than it did, so I haven't unbolted it and I've just kept it on there. So it is 300 grams or whatever it is heavier than it needs to be, but it actually feels wicked. So I've left that as it is. Brakes I've also changed as well. And what brakes is one of those things of personal preference, isn't it? You've got to be comfortable with your lever feel and how your brakes slow you down, and you want to be comfortable with it. So Mavens have been my particular favourite, and I've swapped these off my previous bike. There's quite a lot of stock, but then there isn't. I was just about to say everything else is stock, it isn't. I've got my power meter crank on there, again, because I'm a nerd and I like data. The shock position, I haven't talked about. I think Matt's got his set in low progressive, which I did when I had the air shock on it. But since I moved to the coil, I've gone to low linear. And that's just because I wanted a bit more support in the first half of the travel, basically. So it's got less leverage ratio at the start. The curve's less progressive. I think it's 25% in linear, which still isn't linear, by the way. That's still fairly progressive. My mirror saddle, obviously from my previous bike, I think I've carried this over from a few different bikes. Bergtech grips. At the moment, I'm on clip pedals. If you know me, I swap backwards and forwards depending on how bored I am. At the moment, I'm on clips and enjoying it. And Maxxis tyres. These came on the bike. When I wear these tyres out, I might swap to Schwalbe, but to be honest, they're all really good in their own way. So once you're used to them, it kind of doesn't matter. They're all really good tyres. So it is Orbea Mayo. This isn't a standard paint job. This is, I can't remember what they call it, sky blue or mango. And originally when I did it, I had colour match decals on the Fox fork. But to be honest, the decals on the Zeb are so subtle, and it's all black. I quite like it as it is. It looks a bit more understated, which is weird for me. I normally like the loud and leery thing. And there's way cool finishes to the Mayo paint jobs. Like Matt's got the Trouty Boy kind of colour. But there's also like carbon tints as well. So you can choose like a carbon tint that shows up the carbon weave underneath. If I was to do it again, I might choose one of those, to be honest. Matt calls it the Ukraine flag. I quite like it, to be honest. I had planned to test every link, test every weight, test every wheel size, and this bike is so adaptable that I wanted to test it in every iteration. But truth be told, I enjoyed it so much the first time riding it that I haven't done that much. I've tested it in low progressive, I've changed the shock and the suspension, and that feels like changing a lot, but I haven't tested different wheel sizes. I haven't tested in high BB setting. There's lots of iterations of this bike before we even go to the downhill version of it that I haven't tested, just because I've enjoyed it so much. In fact, I'm going to race it downhill in enduro mode because I'm just so comfortable with how it is, and this is how I ride it most of the time, that I'm not going to put a downhill fork or shock on it. I'm just going to race it in this mode. I think what's made me feel comfortable on it is how stable it is. Like I've talked about before, I don't want to take that weight off and make it less stable, but I also like how it flexes. It's probably one of the flexiest rear end bikes I've had recently, not in a bad way. Like, it doesn't feel like you're crabbing through corners or anything weird, or it's winding up and going to spring out. It gives you quite a lot of grip. How would you say? It is compliance, but it just feels like it wants to track the ground a little bit. I think that's probably an inherent design of the split pivot, because you've got an axle running through this concentric pivot, and I just think that's how stiff the bike is, and it does flex in that orientation a little bit more than most. There's no brace here, so you might say maybe that's an engineered design on the behalf of Orbea, but it actually feels wicked. It feels a bit more confidence inspiring in the grip instead of just relying purely on mechanical grip of the tyre. That sounds a bit nerdy, but if you ride it and you feel that flex, you can feel it conform to the ground when you're kind of flexing it through corners. So that's it. This is my Rallon. I imagine it's going to stay in a very similar guise for the rest of the season. Whether I'm racing downhill or hard rock or just pedaling around the woods, I think it's going to stay the same. Maybe with flight attendant. I would really, really like to try that. But essentially, apart from it locking out or not locking out the suspension, the bike's going to be the same. I can't see me changing anything until I break something and replace it. So yeah, it's Orbea Rallon in enduro mode.